we're good.
All right. Pardon the interruption. All right, we're back. So tonight we're going to be talking about 4-minute matchups or the 4-minute Fiesta.
Clown Fiesta.
So if you've ever listened to, I guess it's like, is it Around the Horn or what is it called on ESPN?
Pardon the
Around the
interruption. Or
Pardon
there's
the-
that too, yeah.
Pardon the interruption. I've heard this called like 4-minute warning on a few other podcasts. We're going to try it out in 4 awards tonight. So tonight we're going to be talking about champion matchups, and we're going to cut the conversation into short, concise conversation about one champion versus another champion. Each person is going to get a chance to, weigh in for 4 minutes. Oh, sorry, we're all going to weigh in for 4 minutes. And then right after 4 minutes, my alarm's going to go off on my phone, and I'm just going to cut it right where it is. So we're going to have to be concise. We're going to talk about matchups, what champions do in a particular matchup, how they play versus one another, whether or not we think it's favorable, and sort of how we would approach the matchup if we were put in that situation. So how is this going to work? I'm going to go on champion, roll a die, and we're going to grab 2 champions at random from the top 20 most played in that role, starting with top lane, of course.
Woo! I feel like there should be game show music playing right now. Ba-da-ba,
Spin that wheel.
Ba-da-ba-ba-ba-ba.
So I'm going to start rolling some dice. I'm starting with top lane here. All right. The first one is 20.
You said the top 20 most played. You're like, oh, please allow it.
That's Rise.
Hey, there's some hope.
The
Is
second
there?
one is 10,
The top 20.
which is Poppy. All right.
Oh,
So
Rise
starting,
versus Pop.
I'm going to count down, and then 4 minutes will start. Rise versus Poppy. 3, 2, 1, go.
I mean, first off, the matchup is kind of weird. Poppy is really strong in the meta right now. Obviously she's eaten some nerfs, but she's still very strong overall. She's not as dominant in the lane anymore, and I would say Rise, though he's not as lane dominant anymore, they both hold up very well in lane.
Yeah, I mean, you have to think of this as a melee versus ranged matchup, fundamentally, so there's that aspect of it. But Rise really is somewhat reliant on certain power spikes, like getting his passive, popping his ultimate and stuff. And I think because he's a bit more late game focused, Poppy may have a bit more room to actually get on top of him early, especially to collapse with the jungler.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think it completely benefits Poppy in that matchup, though, to try to roam and make plays in other lanes and use her TP aggressively, even before 6, because she honestly has pretty strong ganks come level 3. So it's really a matchup where Poppy needs to make the most use of teleport early. And not allow Rise to just snowball out of control, really work on snowballing other lanes to get the game over with, because obviously the longer you let Rise build up, the worse it's going to be for your team, period.
Yeah.
I
don't know if... Go ahead.
Well, I think Rise does have a slight advantage in this matchup for the fact that when he's going against Poppy, Poppy is almost forced to go an early magic resist item, which then offsets her offensive capabilities in lane, allowing Rise to then further scale up past that laning phase. That's all he really needs to not get set behind in the laning phase, so that later on, when he has his raw, when he has archangels and stuff like that completed, he can really start melting people and not give 2 fucks about Poppy later on.
Yeah, I really give the advantage to Poppy as well early game. Rise is just going to be farming with his Q. He has long range, so he's just going to be farming very safely until he gets his tier and other major items as well. Poppy is going to really, as Doom said, he's going to need to use TP advantage just to make pressure and try to snowball the game from there.
Yeah, okay. I think the key thing is it takes Rise a little bit of time before he ramps up, as others have noted. And Poppy does have a fairly strong gap closer, is reasonably tanky early. So like Phil said, I think if Poppy gets on top of Rise early, especially like around the time the lane would reset and it's safe for like a melee to engage on a ranged champion, Rise has to be careful. But if all things, I would say maybe it's slightly Rise favored, mostly because of the range and scaling.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, Poppy needs to be very proactive in the matchup and really, like we said, look to help snowball other lanes and use her utility and her charge and then her ultimate to try to make plays and get other lanes ahead. She's not going to really straight up win that matchup. And in the late game, like I said, the farther it goes, it's just not going to be good for her. So, if
you're the Poppy player, I would say keep out for power spikes. A lot of people don't see Rise as passive, and notice just how much stronger he is when it's stacked. Like that thing can be deadly.
Mm-hmm. Especially, Rise isn't focused on his own gap closers so much since he does have that range component. So, having the ability to keep rooting Poppy over and over can really screw Poppy if she's not watching. Oh, okay, shit.
Oh, boom. And that is our first 4 minutes.
Okay.
All right. We're moving on. We're doing another top lane matchup here. All right. Rolling the dice.
All right.
We got number 2, which is Darius.
Popular.
And 4, which is Echo. All right. 3.
Wait, it's who?
Hold on. This is Darius versus Echo. 3, 2, 1, go.
Okay, so
Ban Echo.
Off, yeah, well, first off, are we making the assumption that this is going to be Tanko?
I think that's a reasonably safe assumption.
Okay.
In top lane.
I still would like Darius in this matchup. I think the ability that he has to really keep Echo around him, even though he does have the shield and the stun, along with the percent health damage, Darius does really benefit from keeping prolonged fights and building tankier than Echo does. So even though Echo may have the first few levels as far as wave clear and mana consumption that he is using, the later this goes into first defensive item completed, Darius really can start to outshine Echo there.
Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if during the first 10 minutes that Darius would be up at least around 10 to 20 CS. But as soon as Echo gets his Sunfire Cape, he should start winning the lane more. And just because of his ridiculous stats and abilities that he has, he will outscale Darius. So he needs that early game. And a nice little tip that you can do as Darius is just walk up to him to start autoing him and using your W. And the minions will not aggro.
Okay.
I did not know that.
Yeah.
And I think that it's very important that the Darius has to land his abilities, but land them properly. When he uses his apprehend, he needs to make sure he hits Echo, and Echo is very, very slippery, and it can be hard to grab him with that cone-shaped skill shot. Also, Darius needs to maximize his damage output, make sure he's hitting with the end of his Q so that he's doing the most damage. I would agree with Phil completely in the fact that he can probably out-trade and damage him in the early game, but once Echo gets an item or two, it's not looking good for Darius, and Darius really needs to be making those early plays and stomp the lane early.
Yeah, I mean, you really got to look at this as like a juggernaut versus somebody who's like super slippery and super mobile, and Darius will have the upper hand mostly because of his just raw damage and like his tankiness that he gets from his stats. But Echo, it has a lot of room to kind of maneuver around this. And then if he gets into mid to late game team fights, like a well-landed Echo W is generally like crazy effective in team fights, and really just the amount of like utility and speed with his other things. So like I would say if you're the Echo player, you're generally playing this matchup a bit more conservatively. But, if you play that, like you could come out ahead in the late game just from like knowing your champion.
Yeah, a smart Echo isn't going to try to have extended trades with Darius. It just doesn't it doesn't benefit anyone to have an extended trade with Darius. When he builds up his stacks and starts getting bloodlust on you, he's gonna tear you to shreds. And Echo is really gonna focus on poking with his Q a lot. That unfortunately, it's gonna incidentally cause him to shove the lane a bit. But I think that he has to play aggressively pokey against Darius and just make sure to stay out of his auto range and stay out of his apprehend.
And keep in mind, junglers are much better at dealing with Darius than Echo.
Yeah.
Okay, Darius all day. Echo, it's like, oh look, I did nothing.
Yeah, Echo will definitely have at least 1 to 2 like get out of jail free cards, with his I forget the
ultimate?
name of his. Well, yes, his ultimate, but I'm also
And we're out of time. That was Darius versus Echo. And that's the last of top lane. What do you guys think of this so far?
I'm liking it. I think we're hitting some good points and getting some good little discussion topics. It's almost like a like 4 minutes of trinket tips, for each champ, and I kind of like it.
Okay.
All right, we got. Let's see. All right, interesting. We're on mid lane now, and the matchup is Lissandra versus Lulu. 3, 2, 1, go.
Fuck Lulu.
I mean,
Done.
yeah, to be fair, this is way too
Over.
many L's in the mid lane.
Lissandra, Lulu.
I'm sticking.
Yeah.
Right.
Lulu brings. They both bring tons of utility to their teams. I would say that Lissandra brings a lot of offensive utility, while Lulu brings much more defensive utility.
Mm-hmm.
Lulu is the ultimate counter engager. She counters engages really well. She's the ultimate fallback champion to for your team to fall back on. She's very, very safe overall, and just has tons and tons of utility. Lissandra is very aggressive. She really wants to poke, shove lanes, get the roam, and get those good Ring of Frost and those good ults off, and really focus on picking and locking down champs.
Yeah, I would say I think this matchup is somewhat heavily Lulu favored,
Right.
mostly because of the range difference that Lissandra suffers from. Lissandra has a smaller range to work with. Like her shatter range on her Q is pretty good, but like aside from that, Lulu's got Glitter Lance, she's got her E, and like in lane, I expect this to be somewhat Lulu favored, but what Lissandra has going for her is that Lissandra's roams are generally a lot more scary than Lulu roams.
See, that's the thing where I kind of differ. I think even when this goes later, I think Lulu does offer more towards the team because they really kind of negate each other almost. Lissandra is trying to get those picks off, or Lulu is trying to stop them from really happening with her ultimate, with her whimsy, with the shields that she can provide for her team. And when
Lulu is such a safe.
When it tries to, when Lissandra is trying to take out that priority target, if Lulu can prevent that, Lissandra has just become useless for the rest of that fight.
Yeah, and Lulu is such a safe champion as well that you both can shove, and it depends greatly on playstyle as well. But Lissandra, with her passive, she has a better time shoving and not wasting as much mana as Lulu. And then she can look for roams and look for ganks then, compared to Lulu, which she might be lower mana then.
Yeah, also, Lulu not only has kind of a small mana pool, but Lulu, her damage isn't as good until she gets an item or two under her belt, while Lissandra has a little stronger base damages and is going to hurt a little more early. They both have very impactful ultimates that almost cancel each other.
That's what I'm saying.
Yeah, so I mean, it's a really kind of a stalemate matchup once they both hit 6.
I don't think it's like particularly super snowbally, but because they're both like ranged mages. But I would say that if I was playing Lissandra, what I would probably try and do is try and look for mid game roams or like early to mid game roams, because like locking down bot lane and like making plays with Lissandra ult is generally a lot like scarier than like Lulu like showing up to your lane and trying to slow you. But at the same time, once you get to the team fight phase, like Haber mentioned, like because you have someone like Lulu that can bring people back to life with wild growth, basically, like it's kind of a shutdown there. So I would say look for roams if you're playing Lissandra.
Yeah, the Lissandra needs to focus, once again on snowballing other lanes and also making those picks where Lulu is not there, trying to separate herself from Lulu as much as possible. And also, like, when it comes down to it, you have one of the strongest engagement laners versus one of the strongest disengagement laners. So,
all right, good points. Good points. We're on to our next mid lane matchup.
Right. Let's hear it.
All right. First, we have. Oh wait, is that middle? Whoops, ladies and gentlemen, that was 80 carry. All right, next
Frostbite.
one. Well, it's pretty close. We've got Corki, and we've got.
It's gonna be versus Jin.
Katarina. All right.
Okay, that's weird.
3, 2, 1, go.
Fuck Corki. Done.
Is that just like what you're doing this whole time? Just picking one champion?
No, seriously. I hate Corki.
It's like you're considering this like a game of fuck, kill, marry, except you're just choosing the fuck part.
All right.
Yeah.
Time is ticking, ladies and gentlemen. What do we think?
I don't like Corki, and the one thing I have to say, like up front, I don't know exactly Katarina's lane potential since the last changes to her bouncing blades, because that definitely does impact the amount of poke she's able to get out in Corki in the early game to mitigate the amount of poke that Corki's able to put out. I think overall Corki's still able to put out a hell of a lot more, and that definitely hurts Katarina's all-in potential overall.
I think this is a heavily, like, at least early on, I think this is a heavily Corki favored matchup.
Mm-hmm.
Like, Katarina is going to get bullied a lot, like, when she tries to go for CS. But I think it's kind of it's going to turn in somewhat similar to what we talked about before, where, like, Katarina can look for roams and try and be more effective in that way. She has that edge over Corki, but like being a melee champion,
I don't know if he still has the edge in roams now with the package.
Once he gets the package,
that's a good point.
He's infinitely better at roaming.
I think the nice thing though for Katarina in this matchup is that if Katarina gets that cleanup like at a dragon fight or she starts to snowball, it suddenly becomes extremely difficult for someone as squishy as Corki to like deal with Katarina's all-in.
That really is kind of like an if. She has to get that snowball early, and when it really comes down to numbers, Corki still has the advantage in most situations over the Katarina. It really is, she needs to have that instance where she gets a couple kills and is able to snowball that lead. Without that, Corki holds the advantage in just about every other category.
Yeah, not only that she has to play really careful because she cannot melee targets because she is melee. She has a Q, she cannot harass that well. She has to keep on farming with her, whatever her Q name is.
And
just dagger.
Yeah, bouncing blade, yeah. And she has to really shampoo and just, it really depends on how well the Katarina just dodges skill shots in laning phase.
That's a super huge point. Like the one nice thing for Kat, I mean, yes, she might have to farm from safe range with her Q for a bit, but if she's able to shunpo and dodge phosphorus bombs, she might be able to look for short trades for Corki if Corki overextends, and if those add up, like we mentioned before, Katarina snowballs extremely hard.
And that's a good thing that Katarina does have on her. She doesn't use mana or anything like that, so if she's able to use her own skills effectively with the shunpo to get Corki's mana out of him, he then becomes a bigger target when it comes to ganks and all-in from Katarina without worrying about him trying to Valkyrie out or any sort of retaliation.
Yeah, Corki straight up wins that lane, but at the same time, like, Katarina is it just has so much potential with once she gets a few items, she's able to get that good good, kill or that, a couple resets, then it's like, oh shit, she can just insta Corki. So
it's on Katarina's strength to outplay it.
Yeah. Katarina's strength is not lane phase. It's the snowballing potential and the fact that she does crazy amount of damage if she doesn't get CC during team fights.
Yeah,
insane amounts of damage.
Yeah,
and
really,
his face roll is very strong.
Corky doesn't have anything to interrupt Cat's ult outside of if he has the package.
Right.
If he has the package and he goes through her with it, that knock aside will interrupt her ult. But that's the only thing he has. He can escape the range of her ult, I think, with the regular Valkyrie. But yeah.
All right, good stuff. Good
now
stuff.
Now time for the fun stuff.
All right, this time it's gonna take an extra second longer because we're doing bot lane. We're doing support and AD carry. So we'll get one lane first. We've got number 4 for AD carry. That's Caitlyn.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
All right.
Caitlyn's support is going to be Thresh.
Oh, okay. That's a pretty strong lane.
Okay, and it's up against... I don't want to do that one again because it's Corky. This one is going to be Jinx. And the support is going to be Tahm Kench. Man. All right. Starting in 3, 2, 1, go.
I think Kate and Thresh is an infinitely stronger duo versus Tahm and Jinx.
Especially with the recent changes, both to Jinx's fish bones. At the same time, the whole Caitlyn rework, extending her range with headshots, makes her an even bigger threat when it comes to poking from a larger range. Jinx really doesn't have as much of that now since she ate that attack speed nerf with Fishbones. It's a lot harder for her to do Fishbones indefinitely in both the laning phases and later team fights. Kate offers a lot more damage in the laning phase, as she always has in most matchups. But as it carries on later, she since her build now focuses around building Hurricane as well, she outputs almost as much AoE damage as a Jinx would, given that it's the same. It's relative gold farming for both of them.
I like to think of it this way, and the damage is one thing, but I think if Jinx actually were to get on top of Kate, she actually has an edge in damage. But realistically, this lane, we have a Caitlyn who's like the longest base range AD carry in the game. Mm-hmm. She's a goddess of bot lane for that reason. With the traps that changed a few patches ago have made it even more oppressive. So I think it's really, as long as Caitlyn's able to maintain a distance on Jinx, it's going to be really oppressive for Tahm Kench and Jinx because Kench doesn't really have a way in lane.
That's the thing, too. Yeah, you're talking about a double range lane versus a ranged and a melee lane. If Tahm Kench does get in and land something on Thresh, Thresh will have a harder time getting away than Caitlyn does, and you can net a couple kills that way. You can 90 caliber net a few kills that way.
Ha!
Nobody? Okay. But
I think this actually gets a lot better, though, for the other lane as time goes on. What I mean by that is, first of all, Jinx's rocket range will increase, which makes it a little bit easier to get those longer range CS. And second of all, as you go from the laning phase into the mid game, Tahm Kench is actually very good at shutting down Thresh hooks later on by actually saving key targets with Devour. So, while it may be a bit oppressive early on, it's, if you can survive and farm up as a hyper carry on Jinx, you might actually come out ahead.
Yeah, and that's
a lot of Caitlyn's damage does rely on the Caitlyn traps. And that's the funny thing about Tahm as well, is that if you do get trapped in those traps, that he can just eat you up and save you for potential huge damage from it.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think these matchups are really interesting because the Caitlyn Thresh matchup provides a really well-rounded comp going into later in the team fights and stuff like that. While, like you said, Jinx and Tahm Kench really do sort of say hey, we're gonna try to protect this Jinx as much as we can later on, because the later the game goes, if Jinx gets one kill in a team fight, now she's firing rockets from her normal base attack speed, and that gets even worse and worse the more kills she gets. And it can really turn into a snowball, basically, for Jinx. if those team fights start to go in their favor.
Yeah, I think that consistently Caitlyn and Thresh are the better matchup, the better duo. But I think that Jinx and Tom Kench have so much more ability to snowball that if you let them get ahead at all, or let them farm up, or let them get into the late game, they have a lot more potential to wreak havoc in a game.
All right. So this was it, ladies and gentlemen. This was our 4-minute Fiesta, our 4-minute matchups.
Fiesta.
Yep.
So let us know what you think about this. We've never really tried a format like this. Let us know on Twitter, email. Did you love it? Did you hate it? Do you hate jelly beans? Whatever.
Do we hate jelly beans?
I don't know.
Who hates jelly beans?
Yeah, who hates them?
Except for the licorice ones. The licorice ones suck.
I don't hate jelly beans.
Oh, really? Really?
I'd like to meet the person who does.
Yeah. Okay. All right. I think
Jelly
if we
Belly's
do this,
OP.
if we do this again, we have to wear face paint or a sombrero.
Yes,
it's the only way it's gonna work.
And it is a clown fiesta. So
I'm just trying to be lenient. Some people don't have face paint. We all have sombreros, but I mean,
well,
not
duh.
everyone.
I mean, who doesn't have a sombrero?
Right?
Josh?
Yeah, who doesn't?
Speaking of sombreros, holy crap, the transition. Okay.
Oh, it's like I planned that.
We got a listener segment
didn't.
we got a question here from Donovan. I'm going to read this. It says, "Hi there, guys. My name is Donovan, and I main middle lane and the occasional top. I have a question about my ultimate in mid, currently during my promos." All right. Hopefully you won those promos because this was sent a while ago.
Yeah, well,
I love to play Orianna.
Ah, the sombrero reference.
Yeah.
Got it.
There we go.
She has an awesome backstory and her kit is nice, but I'm very apprehensive on using my ult to get a low health kill, assist, or on a gank. I usually command protect my frontliner when we go to fight. I mainly do this because I think it'll be better to save for a team fight. Is this the right mentality? If not, when are good times to save my ult or use it?
I think I've kind of said this before, and I tend to preach this a lot, is that you will miss every ult you don't use. And yeah, I understand like the game changingness that her ult is, and sometimes you do need to hold on to it, but overall, I mean, you need to use that ult if it's available and you can guarantee it's going to get you something out of it. Use the damn ult. Like don't be hesitant and start to learn where it's going to benefit you most. But the way you're going to find that is just by going out and using it. Yeah, you're going to fail a lot of ults. You're going to sombrero some ults. You're going to do a lot of stuff. But or you're going to use your ult, then a team fight starts and it's like, oh crap, I don't have it. But just friggin' use it.
And it's largely going to depend as well of who you're ulting and what time in the game it is. Like, if you're using your ult to kill a person who has 12 deaths and no kills, maybe not.
True.
But if you're ulted on cooldown and Baron is right up next and your team's doing it, maybe you should probably save it for that possible team fight. That could be really huge.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think if I had to go with the general rule, I'd probably lean towards what Doom said. Like, there's so many people I see that are like newer players in League, and they're like so afraid to use their ultimates. But like realistically, you gotta use them. Like if you use your ultimate, you might get a chance to use it more often throughout the game, which is really helpful. I guess to Phil's point, if there might be a Baron fight soon, and you just decide to ult a Malphite that's like got a ton of like MR and he's just chilling by himself, like maybe you want that for the actual fight.
Yeah, I think the one thing important to note about the Orianna ult is that it really can be a game changer, not only for the damage it does, but for the CC, and just the direction it kind of gives your team within a team fight. If you start using that earlier on, your team kind of gets a better idea. Oh, okay, this is what we need to be doing to follow up on that to make sure we get the most out of that Orianna ult. The ball in and of itself is sort of an indicator for what needs to be focused in a team fight, and I don't think a lot of people really use that to its full potential. Now, you said earlier that you like to get people with your ult if they're low and stuff like that. Yeah, in most cases, that's totally fine to do. I would encourage doing that. But when it comes to doing team fights, getting that off earlier is much better.
Yeah, I think in early in the mid game, if you're like 1v1ing someone and it might mean a kill, or like you're just like looking for a roam and you're trying to pick someone off by using your ult, I'd say totally go for it. I think the only area where it gets a bit more gray is like late game, like where the next team fight might decide the entire game.
Yeah, you want to save it in the later game, but I mean, if you've used your ult early and that those ults netted you a couple kills, maybe you have that extra item advantage then, which makes you that much stronger, so that when you do use your ult, it'll be that much more game changing. So
yeah, and I think we've kind of covered this one.
Yeah, thanks, Donovan.
Yeah. All right, so this next one isn't really a question as much as it is kind of some feedback or an idea based off of what we talked about last week. In case anyone missed that, last week we talked about Riot's new classes and subclasses, and we talked a little bit about how they didn't actually have subclasses for marksman.
I was kind of pissed about that.
Yeah, I'm curious about these.
So we have, he doesn't exactly have a name, so I'll just say he's anonymous. But Anonymous wrote in and he said, I've brainstormed multiple ideas for marksman subclasses and I'd like to share my proposals. He says bombardiers, or bombarders, which are marksmen who rely...
It sounds much better.
Okay, we'll say you said bombardiers. Marksmen who rely on stat steroids to increase their DPS, like Vayne or Kog'Maw. Seekers, who are mainly, their specialty is to pick off a stray target and hunt them down, such as Quinn, and slingers, which is sort of caster 80 carries like Ezreal and Lucian. So what do you guys think of this breakdown?
I don't necessarily hate it. I definitely agree with the slingers because that's basically like casters, same sort of thing. Seekers are, I don't know. What do you guys think?
I like the direction he's going with this. Like bombardiers, like having a special category for marksmen that rely on auto attacking and auto attack steroids. That really is a very defined subclass within the 80 carries. But there's a lot of carryover into like the seeker category that you're talking about too. So
even
between those like slingers and bombardiers, I really like that.
When I saw Seekers, I was like thinking of Vayne, and then I saw that Vayne was listed in the Bombardiers category. So I guess I like the Slingers, though. Slingers I agree with.
Boba Fett's.
Yes.
I mean, the real question is, where is Graves in all of this?
He's in the jungle fucking up everybody.
He is in the ban on site little subclass there. Yeah.
I don't know. Like, honestly, he's not really a caster.
He's not like an ADC either.
At this point, he's like barely even a marksman.
He's closer to Urgot, honestly, and that's
like
sad.
A bruiser. Yeah.
Yeah, he's really kind of almost in his own class at the moment, which, I mean, right. I will say it's kind of interesting with this whole class-of-class system, how a lot of the new or the now newly reworked champions are kind of going into their own class, almost. So it seems like the newer and most newly reworked champs are the hardest ones to classify.
Yeah, go figure. We'll need new classification systems, right? All
right. Well,
come on.
Go on to Deke.
You want to read this one, Doom?
Decay? Deaky?
Deaky, Decay. So from Deke, what is a good mid lane match or mid lane champ to counter or go even with 80 champions to add to my pool? I main Lux, but often it's not a good idea to first pick her. When the Azduration would tell you fuck off. When that is the case, my second champion is Morgana, and she is safe and decently counters AP laners. But then I'm often stuck not knowing who to pick. Then when I know I'm in an AD matchup, think Yasuo or Zed. Lissandra comes to mind, but doesn't always work out well for me. Suggestions, thanks team, keep up the great effort.
I'd like to quote Lux on this and say that
Me.
it really does come down to superior tactics. It's right,
Oh,
right. Like
damn it.
there's not necessarily like AP
I'm so
champions that
glad
counter
you're
80
thinking
matchups,
now.
but it really is like items and how you play the lane.
Yep.
I think
Yeah.
he said 80 champions, but I think, from the examples he was giving, he was mostly thinking of 80 assassins, which is what you usually see in mid lane.
Yeah.
And like these champions generally struggle against champions that are a lot harder to kill and can like reliably disengage these assassins. Like we mentioned Lulu and Lysandra earlier, both of those champions generally fare extremely well into assassins for that reason.
Yeah, I mean, it's, I think it kind of comes down to a piece of advice that we tend to preach all the time, and I tend to preach all the time, is that if you just play the matchups and learn how to play the matchups and play the champs that you're strongest and most comfortable with, it really doesn't matter about counter picking. And yeah, it's nice to have, a couple picks in your pocket. That way you don't risk getting, picked out or banned out. But I mean, honestly, just learn to play the matchups, play them. You're going to lose a lot of games doing it. But I mean, the more you play those matchups, the more comfortable you'll get with them and the better that you'll get at it.
Yeah, to add on to Haber's point, really, it just comes down to optimization overall. Like, if you're facing Zed, Talon, those type of champions, you really just want to get Seeker's Arm Guard, then into Zonia's after that. And then if you're still losing, then you can maybe build some more armor if you don't feel like you don't want to feed as much anymore, or just go from straight AP from there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, I mean, I think itemization is important, but learning how to play the matchup too and the lane versus all-ins is very important. Learning to land poke early on and keeping them down until they hit sort of that power spike or item spike for those 80 assassins like Zed or Yasuo, like you mentioned. Knowing their all-in patterns when they're going to start going aggressive is really important. And honestly, knowing when to back. Like, if you don't have a reliable way to sustain and you don't feel safe in that lane versus these 80 matchups, once they start to hit that sort of power spike, really like half health is too low to stay in lane. Even
Yeah, especially if they've got like flash and ignite up as well.
Yeah.
Or they get Duskblade.
You're playing with fire at that point, and
right.
if you're up against a good opponent that like recognizes that you're overextending, you will die. So you should you should really recognize like their damage potential.
Yeah, and what you need to do versus those types of assassins is not die. Go like do something else. Go somewhere else. Do something if that lane isn't safe. Because no matter what, there's always going to be times when those 80 assassins learn how to outplay those supposed counter picks.
Yeah. And I'm 100% for like I think Lux is a safe pick into pretty much any matchup. But since the person was asking about champions that fare well into assassins, like generally champions that have good reliable CC, like Lulu and Lysandra were examples. Malzahar can just ult an assassin if he tries to go in. Like champions that can instantly deny an even Annie, like champions that just instantly deny assassins
I love Annie.
make it hard.
Yeah. If you want like a simple mid lane champ to pick up that does great in most matchups, Annie is so overlooked. Like seriously, I think she's honestly still one of the strongest mid laners. Period, and usually it's like she is so overlooked. So don't be afraid to grab other champs, like we said, but like, just learn the matchups, play the matchups. Like, if you're Lux, don't be spamming your abilities. Don't be shoving the lane. Just, hit last hit with the auto attacks, stay under tower, be ready to throw your shield out so that you can block some of that incoming damage and just, don't get hit by Yasuo Qs. Don't get hit by Zed Qs.
Good.
I
mean, if you look at a lot of the champs that would fare well against someone like Yasuo or Zed, they have to either poke them out first or negate their all-in potential. So you do have people like Gangplank, Karthus, and Cho'Gath that can really shove lanes and damage them from afar while staying safe themselves. And you also have champions like Kale, Malzahar, Zillion, and Fizz that can negate that all-in potential when those assassins try to dive.
I'm kind of surprised that Karthus was on that list.
Yeah.
I guess, like, I don't know if that's just a small number that made you, or if you're pulling that off of your head.
Well, I think that Karthus has the ability to shove lane harder, like
Certainly,
against
yeah.
them.
He makes the wind wall pretty useless too.
Yeah, he can punish. Yeah, he does negate a lot of those abilities, but he can punish a AD assassin mid for roaming, and he can still help out his teammates with his ult even while their lane opponent is roaming. So
yeah, but I think in general it's like, as Haber mentioned, if you can negate all in potential, it makes the matchup that much easier. So like if you're looking for champions that like just naturally have an edge, those are generally the ones that I'd look for. But honestly, if you like Lux, I'd probably recommend just practicing the matchups as Lux and just mastering that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's more important that you feel comfortable in the matchup versus having a counter pick.
Because then you'll get past laning phase and you'll be like, now how do I play this champion?
I know I bring up the story a lot, but once again, Wukong. Like I play with a lot of top Wukong. I hated playing against Darius, and I just learned to play the matchup and learn to play it.
Yeah, or if you're just playing Lux, it's because of the AoE skill shot. Play Cho'Gath, as Haber said. He's really easy to play, and that passive just negates a lot of harass from AD assassins. It's so much fun.
And once you have your ult, they don't want to stand anywhere near you.
Yep.
All right. I think we've got room for one last question.
Yeah.
This is from Vina Fici. Vina Fici, I think.
Vina Fici.
Close enough.
I've been trying my hardest to climb out of bronze this season. I have to say that listening to your podcast has helped a lot. Thanks. Last night, I played a game as top Meowkai.
Yes.
And after losing a team fight and losing 2 inhibs, and 1 Nexus turret off of that, we all revive at the same time. Knowing we are weak and we push out the lanes with the down inhibs and start to go check Baron, I spot the enemy jungle Nasus at our blue, so I flash the wall and root him and the team cleans up. Now it's 4v5 and they have no jungle. I thought we should Baron, especially because we were right in front of the pit, but my friend in chat said not to and just marched down the lane to the open inhibs at the enemy base. So my question for you is, if we know we can't win team fights and we manage to get a clean pick on the enemy jungle during the late game, is it a good idea to rush the Baron then, or should we have just marched up the lane?
That is such a situational question. It's very hard to gauge. It depends on the chance.
If you can't win a 4v5?
I think he's saying we couldn't win a 5v5, but we might be able to win a 4v5.
Well, I think regardless, your friend didn't really want to do Baron, and he wasn't really communicating with you, so he just did his own thing. It's better that you all do your own thing as a group instead of splitting off and doing different objectives.
Yes.
And if you're gonna make those Baron calls, you got to just go for it. Like if you go for it and someone's like, I don't know, then just don't worry about it. It's not, because that lost time is usually going to end up not being good, because either A, you could have been doing something else, or B, it gives the enemy a chance to possibly seal the Baron or fight you at Baron, or C, you get that Baron buff and then maybe you don't have as much time to make as good of use of it. So
yeah, remember that doing something that isn't 100% optimal together is better than doing something that is 100% better by yourself.
Yeah, no. I think the Baron...
That's a really good way to put it, man.
Yeah, I think the Baron overall in this situation is kind of the better call. If you're not necessarily sure you can keep marching up the lane, or your team's not willing to dive under towers, even though you're Maokai and can tank that shit up for days. If they're not willing to commit to that, which you have a Nasus jungle, I'm assuming this is not all that high, honestly. Sorry. But most teams there will be more comfortable doing Baron than they are just trying to dive under tower. And if you're just sitting at a tower waiting for more minions to come while your AD carries forcing themselves up there because no one else wants to try to go under the tower, you're wasting your time. If you're not going to commit all in to going under, diving those towers, and cleaning up the rest of them, you're better off going towards Baron.
I think you really got to think about, how much time is it going to take me to do this, Baron? And that's one of those things, like Doom mentioned, where it is situational. Like, if your team has like a Master Yi on it and like a Callista, like it's not gonna last that long. Like if you just killed the enemy jungler near the Baron, like you could probably reasonably just take it out super quick. But if you don't have a very high damage team, I mean, this is the 40-ish minute mark, so I'm assuming you have a pretty good amount of damage. If you really have to evaluate, like, how close am I to the Baron? Like, are they going to be able to respond by the time I walk over to the Baron, even though it's a 4v5? And you mentioned down inhibs. Have those respawned yet? Like, if you have 2 inhibs down and you walk over to Baron, like, that's a super high risk because then you're going to have supers in your base.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it depends how far your lanes are shoved in. It depends how far theirs are shoved in. Do you have ZZ rots? Do they have any high mobility? Do they have teleports up that allow someone to get in your base? Do they have, good wave shoving abilities? Do they have the ability to? Are they more of a team fight comp or more of a pick comp? Like, there's just so many things to consider there. But I mean, overall, I think Crazy Phil said it best, is that it's better to make a subpar decision as a group than make the better one by yourself. So
yeah, I mean, time really is of the essence when you have what you said, two inhibitors down. Yeah, you don't have time to be making decisions there because those things will win the game by themselves.
Yeah, I mean, it's often really hard to act and be decisive in these moments, and especially the lower levels, people are sometimes confused and scattered. But like Phil said, you need to act as a team, and if somebody screws up at the 40-plus-ish minute mark, like that's a good chance it could be game ending, especially if you're already behind.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I think we covered that about as good as we could.
All right. Speaking of game ending, I think it's time for some show ending.
Oh, Jesus.
Oh, you got it.
So,
Sagmaster.
I want to thank Phil for coming on the show today. Thanks, Phil.
Yeah.
Yeah, thanks for inviting me. It was really a lot of fun.
Absolutely. It's fun having you, man.
And to the listeners out there, let us know what you thought of the new experimental segment we tried on this show. And of course, if you have any questions, you can email us, forwards@Trinity Force Podcast. This is Frostbite signing out, along with Doom, Haber, and Phil. Thanks for listening to Forwards.
Later.
Bye-bye.
Bye.